too late.
Well, that's good to hear, because I've done a little bit more on the North Fork, Nehalem, and that feels like that's a little earlier. So I'm happy to hear that. That'll put some time in. All right, everybody, just as a reminder, we're right at our 10 o'clock time here. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Salmonberry Trail YouTube site. I hope that is happening correctly. Appreciate everybody's working with us on getting this meeting rescheduled and being a little bit flexible. I know it's tough on some folks' schedules today, but we've got a good conversation ahead. So again, thank you for that. So we'll just give it a few more minutes here. I think Lisa is just getting on. And it's wonderful to see Cal on the call as well.
Wonderful to be on the call.
We've been looking
Since
forward
Cal's
to
here, I just get to hand over the gavel, right? I've covered a lot of meetings. This is now.
I saw the agenda. I liked it. It said Paul, Lisa, Jennifer. I like that.
Peter and I used to split each agenda item.
We could do that next time. But you know, I haven't been to a Salmonberry Trail meeting since I was on the Parks Commission. Lisa, that was a long.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
And look at my friend Bill's back.
Yeah, I don't know if I should be like this. I'm back. Let's build the trail.
We knew he couldn't stay away.
That's what I keep saying too.
And the fish and I heard some conversation about steelies, so you know you're sacrificing right now.
Well, actually, I'm at Eagle Crest for a week. We've got a house over here. And I picked the wrong week to come because it's been foggy and frozen all day, 2 days in a row.
Yeah.
And I went to the beach last weekend, Bill, and oh my gosh, it was amazingly beautiful. It was cold, but it was beautiful.
My wife has been sending me updates.
She is the director of parks, and they have something agreement with the weather person. I don't.
That must be
I wish.
Maybe I need to get over to Tumalo Campgrounds.
Yeah. I'd like to make that a snowmobile park. How are we on people, John Paul? I have to be on my phone because my laptop is not cooperating, so I can only see parts of who's here, but I think we're close.
I think we're pretty close. I think we're pretty good. And we are.
I see Jennifer.
On YouTube, yes, we have Jennifer, very importantly.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think for the sake of time, because I do know that a few of you have to jump off, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully whoever needs to join us will, and we'll catch them up as quickly as we can. But thank you everybody for the patience for the last time. As you can imagine, in this crazy time, people need to drop for various reasons, and the night before we lost Jennifer pretty quickly, and John Paul and I both were like, Jennifer's carrying a big part of the meeting and we really can't do it without her. So welcome back, Jennifer. I'm glad that we could. I know you wanted us to carry on, but we would not have done it any justice without you. So welcome back and thank you. And John Paul pointed out Cal is with us today, and we haven't had anybody. Well, I think Mike has been with us a couple of times, but since Peter left, we haven't had the forestry director or the state forester with us. And so I am excited to announce Cal Mukamoto, who is the new state forester and director of Oregon Department of Forestry. And I'm super excited he was willing to join us because he's got a pretty heavy legislative session coming at him and a big learning curve and a lot to take on at the agency. So Cal, I just thought I'd pop it over to you for a minute and let you introduce yourself and say hi and whatever you might wanna.
I'm my third month now, so I'm old hand at this. I've learned everything, right? So no, but Salmonberry is really important. I think, you know, of course, this I'm preaching to the choir here, so or singing to the choir, but you know, with my involvement with parks, I think Doug Decker was state forester back then. This concept came up, and you know, I immediately thought, of course, I was riding my bike more often. So this concept of riding your bike from Banks to Tillamook, I just went, wow. But, you know, as you guys have evolved, we found the original vision of just riding any type of bicycle across the, you know, going down through the Salmonberry has changed a little bit, but it's still, I think it will have such an impact in the state of Oregon and the North, have international impact, that the work you're doing here is important. So, you know, I'm going to try to prioritize my attendance to these meetings. And I've told Esmeralda, my assistant, you know, make sure we try to, unless the governor or I don't know, you know, there's a few stakeholders involved with with forestry, you know, and I will try to make it here. And I was hoping to see Mike Caffaretta, but maybe we got our wires crossed. I'd kind of like to have Mike continue to attend these meetings if he can, because he is such a great liaison. You know, I've known Mike for quite a few years, and he's a great guy that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as would we, because he's probably one of the only original besides Bill and Michelle that, that can tell us what we did and why we did it and make sure we don't kind of get off the trail.
Yeah. So I need probably not seeing him. He's either busy with something or maybe he thought since I was here, he didn't need to attend, but I want him to attend.
Hey guys, I just got a text from Mike actually, and he was on the wrong link, so he will be on momentarily.
Excellent.
And that's my mistake. There was a different meeting ID in the link in the agenda.
Yeah.
I just resent that email. So apologies, Mike will be here. And before he gets on, I'll just say I'm just really grateful for Mike and his role with ODF on the STF board, and in general. He's just a great colleague, very much appreciated.
Oh yeah, I've always had the best thoughts about him.
If we talk about the co-conveners from Parks and Forestry, but without Dennis Wiley and Mike Caffaretta, we'd all be lost. So we can't lose him yet.
And you know, I was on the board of forestry, and Mike was I think working out of Salem at the time. I can't remember. I think he might have been in private lands at the time, but you know, I just got a real appreciation for his abilities then. So, but anyway, thank you for allowing me to come to this. You know, there's a lot of really important issues facing forestry, but you know, recreation and these type of activities are becoming more and more important in our day-to-day lives, managing forests. And so, you know, I really appreciate the time I was able to spend on the Parks Commission. It gave me a greater appreciation to the complexity of putting a project like this together. And, but you know, if you don't take the first step, it's going to take a while to get there. So you guys are, I think, what are you at? Probably the 10,000 step? I don't know, what, 100,000?
It feels like we're still back on the first step, but we got to get this done so Bill and I can walk it together before he can't walk it. So,
Okay.
But I'm gonna move us forward because I want to make sure we can spend a good amount of time getting into the meat and the heart of the purpose of today's meeting, which really is to kind of make sure we're looking back at that strategic planning effort and make sure that we're clearly defining the roles of STIA and the structure of its members going forward, and then enhancing STIA structure and composition to make sure that we can deliver on those roles. And it's kind of interesting because as I look around the Zoom room here, right, and I'm trying to scroll through, the key players have changed many times since the inception of the project in 2012. Many, and I'm sure Bill and Michelle are like, yep. You know, Tim before me, Doug and Peter before Cal, and so many others. This is where you don't mention names because you forget somebody, but you know, they seized the opportunity to create something that is invaluable out of a rail line that was in complete disrepair, right? So the vision of creating the 84 miles continuous rail to and with trail from Banks all the way to Tillamook, that idea, that concept has not faltered or changed regardless of its leadership. And it's really cool that we're still at this point. I mean, legacy projects are not easy. They don't happen overnight. They take time, they take energy, they take passion, and they take people keep coming back to help. Bill, thank you. And so it tells us that we've been provided the inheritance of a pretty decent legacy project for our future that's worthy of all the trials and tribulations we've been through, even if they didn't feel like it at the time. But we've endured, and we're going to carry on. This rail line cuts through multiple communities, and it has opportunities for partnership, maintenance, and management of continuous trail. And in those conversations, it is one thing that brought 11 different entities together to create the Salmon Berry Trail interagency. I mean, I don't even know anybody else who's ever gone and used RS 390 and said, we're going to create an agency to make this that important, to make sure we can accomplish that. So we created STIA in 2012 to codify our commitment to each other and the project, and celebrated the victory not long after that of rail banking the line. And I remember looking at Bill saying, well, at least we gave the gift of the rail bank to the future. Sorry, Michelle, but it's rail banked. I mean, at least now we have the ability to start looking at the planning efforts and trying to figure out what those complexities and challenges are, because it's not without them, right? I mean, there are a ton of complexities, a lot of challenges, but there's been no it's been no easy feat, and we couldn't be where we are without those who came before us and provided their skill set, their passion, their energy, their time, even out of retirement. I mean, how many times did Ross come back on the Tillamook Forwarded Heritage Trust side and helped us realize we needed a much stronger partner to be able to help us do fundraising and be more robust in the fund-seeking partnership. And during our 2019 strategic planning session, those efforts really came forward to shift STIA's role more into the leader, more that leaseholder of the trail, if you will, around the maintenance standards and the development standards and making sure the consistency was there for the trail. But we really wanted to start moving the project management and implementation of the trail and the fundraising efforts over to the Salmon Berry Trust Foundation, which was newly created, which is John Paul's role now. And we've acknowledged that it's the next step, but I don't know that we're kind of at this weird fork in the trail, if you will, right? It's like, are we going left? Are we going right? What do we want to do here? And so we need to take a strong look at our current roles and responsibilities and adjust based upon the project's current needs. The right people were there to get a rail banked and to get the project planning done, but now we're like, we need money and we need to actually develop the trail. So we spent some time with Heidi, if y'all remember, from Oregon Solutions in 2021, and we took a look backwards. We tried to catch up our new members and shift our focus collectively forward on the goals of the project. And then what we hope to do today is spend some time making sure that the right key leaders are at the table to best support the project. And that might be at STIA, and that might be at the Salmon Berry Trail Foundation. So I want to make sure that we're open-minded about what worked really well for us in the beginning when we were rail banking and planning is that Tillamook Heritage Trust side and the STIA side had crossover, and we had regular communication and regular coordination. And part of that was just the people that were at the table. So it's time for us to take that objective look and make sure we have the right people. So that might mean you all need to think about whether you might need to give up your seat at the table. You might need to renew your passion for your seat at the table. You might need to move over and make a little bit of room for somebody new that's not at the table based upon where we are. So I am super excited and feel very blessed and fortunate that among us, we have one of the original Inception partners in Jennifer Purcell, and she's also an incredible facilitator. And so Jennifer has agreed, maybe reluctantly, it might be a voluntold, but she has stepped up to use her extensive knowledge of the project and her facilitation skills. And so please join me in welcoming and thanking Jennifer in advance for taking us to the next stage of the meeting. And she's going to actually kind of facilitate a deeper conversation. So I'll pause there and make sure John Paul and Jennifer, is there anything else we need to say or do before we jump there?
Well, I'll just add a note again of gratitude to STIA members around the table now. I mean, the progress that has been made and the access that I've been given, over the last year in particular has been tremendous. Again, the capacity funding from both Washington and Tillamook counties has really changed the conversation for us and given us that runway to get some public funding in for trail development, so that when we do more of the private fundraising, we have more to talk about. So just really, really grateful for that. Really appreciate the relationships around the table here. I think we're certainly headed in the right direction And this is a really big opportunity to put a booster shot in it, because by and large, I think we're going the right way.
Well, thanks so much to both of you. I'm wondering, Lisa and John Paul, if Cal had an opportunity to introduce himself, but I wonder if it might be helpful for all of us to just do quick introductions so that Cal knows who's in the room. All right.
See,
great.
that's why
So-
she's the great facilitator.
So I'll go ahead and kick it off. Cal, it's really nice to meet you. My name is Jennifer Purcell. I'm the Governor's North Coast Regional Solutions Coordinator, and it's a pleasure to meet you this morning and be with everyone today. I'll kick it over to Commissioner Willie, and then maybe you can kick it to somebody next to you.
All right, thank you very much. Lisa, that was a great recap. I came in late to the meeting. I apologize, but you did a great job of giving the historical perspective. I'm Washington County Commissioner, District 4, which is basically the western part of Washington County. So about 20 miles of the trail are in the western edge of my district. And I joined the commission and certainly STIA about 4 years ago. This is my 4th year. It's the end of my first term. And Salmonberry Trail is one of the reasons why I'm actually running for re-election, because I really want to see us make some strides into creating a trail that, like Lisa said, that I'm not too old to walk on. So we've got to get this thing going, because I'm no youngster. But anyway, it's good to meet you and have you here. So thank you for that. And I've got, Mike. Let's do Mike. Good to see you, Mike.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's good to see my friends on here and people that have been working hard on this. Mike Capretta, Oregon Department of Forestry. I'm the district forester here in Forest Grove. And I appreciated, Lisa, your introduction there. I was able to hear some of it and the nice words, but and Bill Bartline, good to see you. You know, that rail banking process and the 10, 12 years of hard work. And anyway, it's been a fun project, and I think we've made good progress, and I hope we're close to the building stage. So good to see everybody. Thank you.
And Mike, I hope you were on as everybody was giving you this big love praise thing, and you probably missed it, but you were very well spoken of before you got on.
I was embarrassed, but I appreciate that, Lisa. So yeah,
well, you had an incredible contribution to the project, so thank you.
Thank you. And Bill Bartline, good to see you. If you want to go next.
Okay, Bill Bartline, started in on this about 2010 when I asked to get appointed to the port board so that I could look at rail banking the railroad, and have been involved ever since that point to the point of retirement. And now I'm back on the Port of Tillamook Bay board, and I am the representative for Port of Tillamook Bay on STIA, the liaison. So with that, I will pass it off to, let me get my screen over. Dave Perula. Sorry, screwed it up, but Dave.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, everyone. I'm Dave Perula. I'm the relatively new president and CEO of the Washington County Visitors Association, and we market Washington County under the brand Tualatin Valley. I'm new to, more or less new to my role. I'm also a new Oregonian. So I want to thank John Paul and Mike for getting me excited about the project and taking me over bridges, under bridges, on top of trestles and through the woods. I'm picking up where my predecessor, Carolyn McCormick, who had served on with you folks for some time. I think it's really important, particularly for, as Commissioner Willie talked about, that northwest corner of our county, and really some interesting things are happening there. And I think closing that initial loop between Salmonberry and Stump Stewart is going to be real exciting. Who is next? Lisa's there. Is Michael there? Michael Langley there?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Michael Langley. I'm the Tribal Council Secretary for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and I was actually trying to remember when I started. I think it was 2018.
I was going to say 17 or 18, Michael.
Yeah,
I think, yeah.
I know I got elected in 2017, but I think it was probably 2018, somewhere around there. But good group of people, and such a great project. And I like to remind everybody that I am a 1985 graduate of Tillamook High School. So I'm very proud of my community and the forward thinking, and take it all the way back to the March of Dimes fundraising is what we called it back then. But always been a community that gave, and I really appreciate that. And it really falls in line with our tribal values as well. So thank you. Good to be here.
I'll kick it over to Representative Weber.
Thank you, Representative Weber. House District 32, half of Tillamook County, Clatsop County, part of Columbia, Washington County, and one household in Yamhill County. And I have been a proponent for this concept. I hope it's accomplished in my lifetime also, because I think that this would be a fantastic economic boon to the area. And Bill Bartline's the one who got me started on this. And so Bill Bartline, I'm glad to see you here. I will pass it off. Let's see.
Maybe Megan.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm the staff assistant for Commissioner Willie, just listening in. Thank you.
And last but not least, Yami.
Morning, everybody. I'm Deani Valentine. I'm a senior transportation planner with Washington County, and also here supporting Commissioner Willie, and been involved with the project, I think, since 2016.
Great. I think that's everyone. Cal, that gives you a sense of who's in the room, and you can see really, Lisa did such a good job framing the history and sort of where we started and where we've been and where we find ourselves today. But the diversity of folks in this room in terms of longevity with the project, I think is part of what's so exciting. I think I love that Lisa referred to the Salmonberry as a legacy project. And when we think about sort of the legacy that's already being built, the continued enthusiasm for those of us that have been involved for a long time, and then the newer energy that comes to the room, it's really exciting. So Lisa, John Paul, and I have been talking about what are really the objectives and the desired outcomes for today. And I just want to flag a couple of things. It's become very clear that we need to update the strategic plan for the Salmonberry. We've been through significant strategic planning efforts, and as Lisa mentioned, did some work middle of last year to take another look at the strategic plan. But we're at this really interesting juncture where we're starting to move into construction and implementation for portions of the trail, and really want to make sure that our strategic plan reflects where we're headed. So our conversation today will take a look at a few of the pieces of the strategic plan in a little bit more detail, and our conversation will then inform updates. I suspect that it would be helpful to have a small group that might be willing to do a little bit of pencil to paper on drafting an update to the strategic plan. John Paul will facilitate that, but it would be good probably in time for our next board meeting to have a draft proposal that we can start to take a look at. So be thinking about if that's something that you would be interested in engaging in as a small group participant. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about membership and structure, roles and responsibilities, and implementation strategy. And so we wanted to start with membership and structure. Lisa talked a little bit about, do we have the right people at the table, particularly as we're moving into this next phase for the Salmonberry Trail. And so a couple of things that Lisa and John Paul and I have been talking about are, number one, do we need to look at expanding the membership of STIA? And number two, do we need to take a look at the organizational structure of STIA? So as we're moving from planning and organizational development into construction and implementation, again, do we have the right people at the table? Who might be missing? So I'll pause there and just, if we could do a little bit of brainstorming around who may be missing from the conversation. And then we have a couple of ideas to propose, but I wanna provide space for open dialogue first. John Paul, maybe could you run through, or Lisa, somebody who has it right in front of them, the current STIA membership so that we understand who is on the board now?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm going to pull up a directory here and I'll just kind of rattle it off of the top of my head in the meantime. Of course, we have in convening roles, Lisa and Cal as agency heads. We have Washington and Tillamook County elected officials with us as well, who are leading the capacity funding now. We have Dave with the Washington County Visitors Association representing the tourism aspect of this. Michael, of course, with the Confederated Tribes, the Grand Ron. Let me continue here and find this directory. Gosh, in addition to folks on the call, Mike, of course, with ODF as well. Diami and Megan with Washington County supporting Commissioner Willie. And just, every chance I get, I want to thank Diami for his really close support and work and planning expertise. Representative Weber, as well as an elected official. Of course, Senator Johnson's seat, I believe, is being filled at the moment. So that's been one change that we've had recently. And
then I'll throw out Port of Tillamook Bay, and Cal, I should mention the Port of Tillamook Bay manager, Michelle Bradley, was on at the opening of the call. She had to hop off, but if you haven't had a chance to meet her, Michelle is another member of STIA that's been engaged with the project since its inception.
We've also had the Tillamook Forest Heritage Trust with Sean Morford's leadership represented here. And of course, Jennifer, your role in Regional Solutions, very much appreciated. I think that by and large covers us, and my apologies for anybody that I may have left off.
So considering that membership, I would open it up to suggestions of who might be missing. Go ahead, Bill.
So I'm wondering if maybe a representative from the city of Banks and a representative from the city of maybe Rockaway Beach would be good. I know Rockaway Beach has interest in getting started on the trail, and maybe one of them, it might be nice to outreach to them.
Thanks, Bill. I'll note that the city of Rockaway has received some funding for building out that portion of the trail, and so that's a really great idea.
Yeah, Jennifer, because we only have, I'm looking at the actual the board itself, and it's Parks, Forestry, Tillamook County, Senate, the Senator District 16 position, somebody from the Salmon Berry Trail Foundation, Confederate Tribes of Grand Ron, Port of Tillamook Bay, Washington County Visitor Association, the Rep District 32 position, the Governor's Regional Solution position in Washington County. So we don't really have any city representation.
Any cities.
Mm-hmm.
I think another way to look at it is, where are we mirroring? Where we have representation in one county from a certain position, do we have it, excuse me, in another? And does it make sense to have those parallel perspectives represented for each?
And I would just share, and I would just share a thought from my initial interactions with Mike and John Paul, and I don't know who would best serve on STIA for this, but it sounds like one of the concerning barriers to success are neighboring property owners and being able to keep them from stalling the project. And so so having representation from from these bookend communities might really make sense, because someone that can actually can talk to people that might be barriers. So just a nickel's worth of something I observed.
Makes sense.
It's worth more than a nickel, Dave. I thought it myself. Maybe having a citizen representative that is a neighbor would be very helpful.
Bill, is your hand still up, or you forgot to take it down? Okay, there you go. Other thoughts? I guess in line with John Paul's comments, I'm wondering, so we have Washington County and Washington County Visitors Association, and we have Tillamook County. Would it make sense then also to have Tillamook County Visitors Association? Dayami, I see some nodding of heads and some thumbs up.
Yeah.
And I see Dayami's hand. Is that a hand raised or a thumbs up?
Just one additional thought is kind of the economic development side of having that perspective reflected on the board. I think that can be represented either from the communities, the cities themselves, but there might be another, if that's Colpack or somebody that could support that perspective.
That's a really interesting idea. And Colpack, of course, would include all of the trail region.
Yeah.
John Paul, is your hand up?
It is, yeah. Just seconding that, especially as I'm working with Ariane and Sarah Lou on an EDA proposal now. In terms of the tourism stakeholders, I think, at least having a conversation with ACFA as well and understanding what the fit is between, or sort of the roles between Visit Tillamook and ACFA in this section might make sense. I say that maybe because I think that ACFA is starting a group similar to the Salmonberry Trail Foundation for the Oregon Coast Trail. And obviously there's quite a bit of overlap between Wheeler and at least down to Barview, if not further. So, might want to look at ACFA and their role. And then, considering the price tag for this and that we are trying to shift the paradigm for a major piece of infrastructure, knowing that federal infrastructure funding is coming down through ODOT. I wonder in terms of, engaging that agency more and at a higher level, if that would be a really big benefit to STIA and to this project.
And I concur with that. After the last couple of meetings and having more of the regional based ODOT staff participating and looking at their infrastructure projects that they're doing, I think there's an incredible opportunity there to collaborate and or take advantage of projects they're already doing nearby or on the trail. And it really has a strong nexus for the transportation and safe routes to schools and just the direction they should be heading. So I do think ODOT should have a pretty strong seat at the table. I don't know if we can convince Director Strickler of that, but Cal's new. He could probably ask him to do it.
Well, and Lisa, I think also particularly in the coastal segment, when the implementation has implications for Highway 101, it just we're moving into that phase where we're having ODOT participate more actively in the leadership. I think could be really useful. I don't see any other hands. That seems like a good segue to talking about right now. STIA is chaired by Lisa and Cal, representing Parks and ODF, and I'm wondering what folks think about the idea of moving to a tri-chair model. We certainly need to connect with ODOT, but it does seem like, particularly in the coastal segment, ODOT has been actively engaged in not only pursuing funding, but implementation, design and engineering, et cetera. And that may not, to Lisa's point, that may not be Director Strickler, but I think looking at director or designee may be worth pursuing. Any thoughts on that?
I guess, Jennifer, I'm just going to throw out that I don't know that I completely see that it has to be the state agencies co-convening. I think Washington and Tillamook County also have a great opportunity to step up into those roles. So I don't want anybody to be quiet if you're thinking those things and that you're going to hurt feelings, because Cal and I don't have them anymore. So, but if you think that, we all have to be thinking about what serves the project best, right? And what's going to advance things. And if there are other people that should be co-convening or tri-convening or whatever that may look like, please do not hold back and share what your thoughts are, because I think that's the only way we're going to get to the right structure here.
Thanks, Lisa. Go ahead, Cal.
I was just going to echo what Lisa says. I think we need to look at what the project needs to move this forward best. And I can see the logic of having another state agency in there, because, you know, we can direct funding or whatever, or look for funding. But, you know, we have localities we have to consider. We have individuals who are going to be affected by this. And so maybe there's a sensitivity there on the chairs that might be reasonable from more local representation. That's all I'm going to say. I am so new at this. I am just here for the ride right now.
Thank you. No, we appreciate the perspective. Someone said to me once, you're never more objective than you are in your first couple of months on the job. So you're bringing a really important perspective, particularly for those of us that have been around for a long time. John Paul.
Yeah, just from a really practical perspective here, with the expectation of bringing in funding to build the trail, I think that having 3 agencies in a trifecta role would be really effective. To Lisa's point, if that ends up being designees that are empowered, I think that would be great. And then to address Cal's point about geographic representation, particularly given that Washington and Tillamook counties have stepped up in such an important capacity funding role, I do think it makes sense for them to be elevated both in STIA and also some build more of that crossover with the Salmonberry Trail Foundation Board, maybe even some shared membership. And I wonder if having some type of executive committee structure that included the 3 agency heads and those elected officials would give us the clout that we need, honestly, to do some serious, access these serious pots of funding we need, and also make sure that we are representing the people of Washington and Tillamook counties in those conversations.
And that's a great note, John Paul. The idea of an executive committee has come up in some planning conversations, and whether or not, so STIA currently meets quarterly. The timeliness of that, particularly as funding opportunities present themselves and we talk about implementation priorities, it may not lend itself to a quarterly interaction. And so the idea of an executive committee could be an attractive way where STIA could incorporate an authority delegation, what the makeup of the executive committee is, and what their decision-making authority is. And then that group could potentially meet monthly or more frequently than quarterly, certainly, to keep things moving in the interim and report back to the full STIA board. An executive committee, as John Paul mentioned, could include Washington County, Tillamook County, and then maybe parks and forestry and transportation as a thought. So what are folks' thoughts about that type of leadership structure, committee structure, and committee makeup? Go ahead, Bill.
I think it's a great idea. It'd be far more nimble than what we do now, and could get it moving at a little quicker pace on making some of those mundane decisions, or the decisions that an executive committee would be empowered to do.
I agree. It seems like when we had the planning subcommittees and groups, we advance things much quicker than where we are now. So I'm right there with you.
Commissioner Willie, I'm going to put you on the spot as a Washington County representative. What are your thoughts about being more actively engaged in leadership structure and the idea of an executive committee that would include the counties?
Right. And as I'm listening to this conversation, I would have to agree with John Paul. I think when we start probably expanding our scope of funding capabilities, it would be important to have the elected officials representing the two counties that are most impacted. So I completely agree with that. I've always, when I first came on the STIA board, I was ex officio, and that was in 2019. And obviously I pursued having a real seat at the table because I thought Washington County should. We've got 20 miles of the trail. There's no reason why we should be ex officio and setting off on the side. And so I'm happy that I did that. And yeah, I'd be pleased to join that executive committee if that would be helpful, and certainly represent the county. Dave and I met for lunch just a few days ago, and so we certainly could coordinate any conversations or efforts that we need to do there. So yeah, I'd be okay with joining that.
Great. I just had another thought, and this may sort of help facilitate moving us into the conversation about roles and responsibilities. But given that the foundation is a separate organization from STIA, certainly there's a relationship between the two, but should there be either a seat at the executive committee or on the STIA board that is represented by the Salmonberry Trail Foundation?
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. And, I think I may have just left Giles off of my rattling off of folks, for STIA members. I think looking at ways to really strengthen that relationship is certainly part of the conversation. Absolutely.
And Mike can probably weigh on this better than me because it was when I was coming in, right? Tim was going out and Doug was not far behind that. But I mean, without Ross sitting at both tables, I don't know that we would have been as effective as we were, because that integrated communication was happening. And that puts a lot on John Paul to be in these meetings and then go back to his board and relay. And you lose so much in that messaging thing that I think that with where we are, I think it's time to think about that integration and upping that game a little bit with both teams.
Great. Dave, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I agree with what Lisa just mentioned. I think as far as tying up the work and the goals of the two organizations together, and I don't know how the foundation board is laid out, but it seems like it should be very clear, because they're there to support with their work with what STIA is doing. So I think you have to either have an ex officio position or a designated position or something of that sort, just to make the communication clear.
Yeah.
Thank you. And John Paul and Lisa, maybe you can refresh my memory, or maybe Mike. Does the STIA board, did the Forest Heritage Trust have a voting seat on the STIA board, or were they ex officio?
It looks like, based upon our previous charter, that they were a voting member.
Yeah.
Okay, so that might make sense. Go ahead, Mike.
And on our 2021, it shows Salmonberry Trail Foundation and Tillamook Forest Heritage Trust both were
right.
Both voting members.
Okay. So maybe it's already there in structure, but we haven't had someone in practice designated in that seat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Giles has, I think, regularly attended STIA meetings, as available. So yeah, maybe the structure is there, and just putting wheels on it would be good. And then, also, I wonder if well, I don't want to jump ahead on the agenda too much. I think there's a similar conversation in terms of STF, composition, and making sure that both organizations are clearly defined and the roles in relation to each other. Yeah, look forward to that side of the coin as well.
Thank you for that perfect segue, John Paul. Because the next item on the agenda is to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities. We looked last time we were together at the early agreement between, I think it was a memorandum of agreement or a memorandum of understanding between STIA and STF, really identifying STIA as the leaseholder and the foundation as the implementer. And we were hoping today to do a little bit of exploring around how to strengthen the foundations board in alignment with the STIA board, and both around capacity, but better understanding roles and responsibilities as well. And so I thought we'd start with maybe a conversation about STIA's expectations of the foundation. And John Paul, maybe you could provide us a quick overview of the foundation's organizational structure. So you are sort of all things Salmon Trail Foundation, but what is the intention around the organizational structure and capacity?
So we are a C3 organization. I think the intent is that we are empowered by STIA to go build the trail. And that's pretty broad strokes. I think what that looks like practically is that our core business is being able to bring in funding, largely public funding for final planning and construction. I think we do need to be building, and we are building, a private fundraising arm as well. That I think that's going to be much more activated. Once we have a development director on board, and then also when we have some trail down in both counties, and we have some very practical, tangible things to talk with potential donors about. Fundraising is certainly a big part of it. And there's a range of competencies that are represented in both of those. On the one hand, working on proposals that are highly technical, ODOT related, community paths, EDA, travel, tourism, outdoor recreation. On the other hand, building the organizational infrastructure, and then also the abilities to be effective at doing private donor outreach to build that, opportunity fund and more diverse revenue streams for the organization. And then we also need to communicate well and build enthusiasm for the trail and tell the story of this place, starting with the tribes and through the history of the rail line, onto, kind of public land values that are emerging today. So, and then adding to that the ability to implement and execute as those funds are brought in to manage construction. That's how I see it in broad strokes, and there's quite a bit there. It's pretty simple from a distance, and the closer you get to each of those things, the more the complexity emerges.
And John Paul, in terms of those roles and responsibilities, you are currently the only employee, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the intentions around building out capacity, where do you see that? Where do you see those priorities, and what are next steps?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have funding for the development director from Murdoch. So becoming ready to hire that position and that person to be in a place where they can succeed is a high priority. We had scoped a job description for essentially Dennis's role that is focused on planning and construction. I think that role would be, helping shepherd the development of significant infrastructure proposals, managing vendors, managing all that goes into getting those sizable grants well administered and reported on. I think that having some type of project coordinator or administrative type support would be incredibly helpful. I would just mention being somewhat aware of some of my strengths and weaknesses. I think that would be particularly, beneficial. And I would love support to help make sure I don't become the somewhat frazzled small nonprofit ED, but rather that we have really clear buckets that we're delivering on, the proper capacity to deliver on those and to meet the expectations. And I think the third piece of that is there are more great ideas and good things that we can do than we can feasibly do now. So aligning expectations, particularly with STIA members and STF board, around the order and cadence of these things, which gets back to that planning conversation, Jennifer.
Thanks. And I think what we really hope to reinforce today is the importance of the success of the foundation, given that we've transitioned to a time where STF is the implementer. I think we as STIA have a very vested interest in the success of the foundation because that will directly correlate to the implementation and success of the Salmonberry Trail. So when we think about alignment, we've talked about making sure that the foundation has a seat at the STIA board. Do we want to have a similar conversation about the makeup of the foundation's board and whether or not it makes sense to have STIA designees on the foundation board as well? So there's that reciprocal relationship.
I do wish that Erin was on the call, and she let me know that she had a conflict. She and I have kind of started this conversation and have a lunch scheduled for next week. But I would think, particularly with the funding role that both of the counties are playing, it's very important to me that those expectations are clearly communicated through STIA as well as STF, and so that we are, satisfying those expectations. So. I wonder if maybe even starting the conversation around, the funder's role and that reciprocity, if that would make sense.
And Jennifer, I when I came on, even before Tim left, Tim and I and Doug all sat at the table with the Tillamook Heritage Trust, and I never understood. I was like, well, why are we all here? And then as we progressed into the deeper conversation around rail linking and planning, and it was very clear, right? And I will tell you from, you guys probably all have way more experience this than I do, but we at Parks have 26 different nonprofits that we work with just in our parks, our friends groups, if you will. And if we don't keep, in my experience, I've learned over the years, if you don't manage and maintain those relationships and keep very clear goals between both organizations, it becomes unruly and we're going to lose focus of the project. And I think having, I would agree with John Paul. I think even having the primary funders, the counties in particular, sitting over on that trust side, so that way it's very clear to that board, because the Salmonberry Trail Foundation exists to support the Salmonberry Trail. And what happens when we don't have that integration is they start coming up with other ideas of how to implement trail or do things that are going to be out of alignment with where STIA and or the rest of us want to be going. And so I think the more that we can get both of those tables, and I know it feels like extra time, but unfortunately for a legacy project, I don't think there's any other way to do it, because you've got to keep those clear lines of communication wide open, and you can't put that onus on, whether it was John Paul or whether it was Alana before that, or that when it was the Tillamook Heritage Trust, same thing. It's like Ross had to play both sides constantly, and he would be in conflict. But I think for the project, we're going to have to consider some way to strengthen that.
I see Mike's hand.
Yeah, I work some with the Salmonberry Trail Foundation and John Paul, and I think they would welcome that kind of that support and help and cross pollination. They're volunteers, they care a lot, and leadership that this group provides is important to that group, and they would welcome some of that, I think. So.
Thanks, Mike. John Paul, can you tell us a little bit about the foundation's bylaws? How many members are there on the foundation, and would it require sort of a relook at the bylaws to designate seats, or how is that currently structured?
I don't think that the bylaws have a specific number of board members in there, so I don't think that we would have to make revisions there. I can do a more thorough check, Jennifer, before our next conversation on this. I think very naturally STF is in a state of transition right now, which again, very natural, having the organization stood up, having got a lot of those very initial things done. And I think we'll probably see some folks that are dropping off. And I think it's a really great time potentially to have some new members come in and have a lot more, really, really clear alignment between STIA and STF. So my understanding, Jennifer, is that it wouldn't necessarily trigger any major foundational changes in the organization. And, we're even actually a little bit lower on board seats right now than we had been historically. So it might be a really natural time.
Thanks, John Paul. Dave, your hand is up.
Thanks, Jennifer. Earlier on in the meeting, you had mentioned revising and reviewing the strategic plan for STIA. It seems to me maybe this is really a logical portion or step or action that should be included in that, is really clarifying the mission of both the foundation and and STIA, and so you're really clear with how the expectations and the missions of the two organizations, how they run along to support each other. So planning for success further down. So I just as you're talking about that strategic work, it seems like this is something important that could be part of it.
Thanks so much. And I'll flag, I am part of another organization that has sort of a paired foundation, and in the foundation's bylaws, it designates seats for members of the board or council, not to exceed a majority, just so that you avoid quorum when the other organization is meeting. So John Paul, maybe that's worth thinking about in terms of the makeup of the foundation. If there is a designation of 2 or 3 seats, that just making sure, mindful that doesn't end up creating a quorum. So if it's 3 of 7 or 2 of 5.
Right. That makes sense.
All right. So it does look like sort of a side-by-side comparison of the mission, and then thinking more specifically about the makeup of the foundation board, and considering sort of including amendments in the bylaws or whatever is appropriate to ensure that that's for in perpetuity, and ensures that alignment between the two organizations makes sense. So when we talk about a small group that's interested in sort of putting pencil to paper on some of this, it can overlap maybe both, looking at STIA, the STIA membership, as well as the STF bylaws and makeup of that board and alignment of those missions.
Yeah.
Super.
And Jennifer, I know
Other
it's
thoughts?
a little more
Go
in the
ahead.
in the weeds, but I know we have a standing agenda item for STF to kind of report out where things are at and what they're doing. John Paul, does that exist on STF's side, that there's a STIA update? If so, it's probably coming from you. But I just think as you're getting into that planning mode, we might want to just make sure there's that standing agenda item on both.
I think that's a great suggestion, Lisa. That doesn't exist right now, but I think we're going to see a lot of opportunities like that to dovetail.
All right, super. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit into implementation strategy. I think around membership and structure and roles and responsibilities, it will be good for John Paul and a small group to prepare a draft for us to react to at the next STIA meeting, but this provides some good feedback to get that started. In terms of implementation strategy, John Paul and I have been working really closely on a couple of catalytic projects on the coastal side of the Salmonberry, and it really got us to thinking, as funding opportunities present themselves, how are we as STIA being strategic about taking advantage of opportunities and thinking about, are there criteria for prioritizing construction projects, and also thinking about trail standards as we advance projects. So I mentioned earlier with the portion of the trail that has now been funded in Rockaway Beach, as we're moving into implementation for that and talking about sort of how is STIA and the foundation represented in the project implementation, what sort of standards and criteria are built into that, and as we're pursuing other funding opportunities, how are we thinking about those priorities, and being strategic about what we're pursuing. So for this phase of the conversation, I think we'd like to just start by capturing criteria for prioritizing projects. So we have the planning complete for the entirety of the trail, all 4 segments. There's sections within those. There are certainly some sections that are low-hanging fruit, very few barriers to implementation, Rockaway Beach being an example of that. And then there are other sections that have significant barriers to implementation, but they are still priorities given other factors like safety and connectivity with the trail. So I'd love to just start the conversation today about criteria when we're thinking about how to prioritize sections for pursuing investment and implementation. Go ahead, Mike.
I think one of the criteria that I would see is when the local community is ready and wants that development to move forward. And I think we're trying to figure out how to build a trail through these communities that helps everybody be successful. And when they're there wanting it there, I think that might be the top criteria to make it happen. So
great.
Maybe when that aligns with funding, like when someone's willing to fund it, that might be the other top criteria.
John Paul?
Yeah, I think that it will be great to go through a prioritization exercise. And I think having that undercurrent of opportunism is a really important element to that too. So, if a particular funding opportunity comes up, that we be nimble and act on it. Just really practically speaking, to share my thoughts on it, I think if we can get trail down in Washington County on the catalytic loop, that would make a whole lot of sense. It has independent utility. It serves the existing demand on the banks for Nonia. I would really love to be focused on the next phase of the Rockaway connector, because then we can talk about kids getting to and from school safely between Rockaway and Nia County High and middle schools. And then also, we have put quite a bit of energy lately into that Barview Garibaldi connector, and the criteria for that in my mind, I think, has been that if we can come up with a design solution that is much less than the cost estimate in the initial planning, and get a really challenging section that is very dangerous and a very high priority for ODOT addressed, then it probably helps really build momentum for other sections of the coastal trail as well. And then from there, kind of moving towards the middle. I also am aware that the Safe Routes to School program is going to be coming up fairly soon. So I think Rockaway makes sense there, and maybe we get another proposal going in Garibaldi as well. Which again, Jennifer, sorry, that's less the criteria of it and more the logic of kind of what's in place right now. I definitely think that, if those stand as priorities vetted with STIA, having a really clear criteria will be very, very beneficial, so that there's a lot of transparency and inclusion around why we're prioritizing the proposals we're developing.
Thanks, John Paul. So I did capture some criteria as you were talking. So thinking about, to Mike's point, community readiness, certainly availability of funding and being able to be opportunistic, but also being thoughtful. If we have lots of funding opportunities, as we anticipate infrastructure funding coming our way, we also have to be thoughtful and prioritize within that availability of funding. So the other things I heard were independent functionality. So does the independent functionality of a section make it a higher priority than another section? Connectivity with either parts of the Salmonberry Trail or other trail systems, is that something that should make a section a higher priority? Public safety, certainly the Barview Garibaldi section is sort of the poster child of this trail endeavor, where there are significant barriers to implementation, but it has a high public safety benefit to it. And then cost. What role should cost play as we're prioritizing sections? So those are a few that come to mind. I know we've also had conversations, particularly with the Rockaway section, around emergency preparedness. And as funding opportunities present themselves, sometimes emergency preparedness, expanding access to evacuation routes, those could be relevant as well. So I'll throw that one out there, and then I see Lisa's hand.
I love all of those. I also want to make sure that we build enough flexibility that if all of a sudden there is an opportunity, whether it's at a local level from a funding or a readiness, that we don't lock ourselves so far into the criteria that we miss an opportunity. So just the auditor asking for gray. Because I knew Bill was going to.
All right. And I see Michelle has rejoined us, and we've assigned you all sorts of roles and responsibilities in your absence.
Sweet. That's what I get for missing part of the meeting.
I
That's
happen to
how it
know
rolls.
Michelle is really good at creating committees and bylaws and charters. She rocks at that stuff.
Lisa Assumption, you're on my list now.
We'll be having some fun together then.
I will also note, so Michelle, we're talking about criteria for prioritizing sections of the trail for implementation and what should be considered. I'm also thinking about Mike Capretta and I co-convened the advisory group for the river and canyon segments. And one of the things that we talked quite a bit about was accessibility and the ability of the trail to provide outdoor recreation opportunities, particularly for historically underserved communities. And so I think accessibility and equity of access and opportunity could also be a criteria in terms of prioritizing sections.
I don't disagree with that.
I wonder too, the other thing we've talked about is amenities. And so there are, in the planning documents, there are certainly proposed areas, for instance, for trailheads or other parking or other amenities like restrooms. Those opportunities in terms of from a funding perspective may present themselves separately from trail implementation. Maybe there is a criteria that we could include that flags, a complementary to developing amenities piece of the puzzle. I don't know if that's the right way to say that. John Paul, I see your hand up.
I think that's a great thought, Jennifer, because there may be places where, the trail construction doesn't emerge as a high priority, but an amenity can be built that will serve a community in an area and then also have utility when the trail is complete. And that might be particularly a way that we can engage some communities where we might not get there with trail as soon as we'd like, but we can provide a benefit that will, serve the salmon very long term, but serve those communities in the meantime as well. And I do think there are probably different funding sources out there.
Right.
Yep.
I think there's a couple of really practical examples of why this is a timely and important conversation. and John Paul, I don't want to steal your thunder. You're probably going to talk about it a little later, but as John Paul's been pursuing an EDA funding opportunity and really looking at which section of the trail is the best fit for that funding opportunity, these are some of the things that that the group really wrestled with to make sure, number one, that there's a competitive application. Thinking about the Salmonberry Trail as a whole, what is best for the Salmonberry Trail, capital S, capital T, in terms of providing a competitive funding application to get catalytic projects on the ground. And so when we're looking at the entirety of the 84 miles, where should that prioritization lie? And so these are great examples of how we provide John Paul with a lens with which he can look at project opportunities.
Jennifer, just to add to that and circle back, I think getting to that place and then also really firming up the organizational structure with STIA, the additions we talked about, an executive committee, similar path with STF, it just feels very powerful to me. If we have a good, clear, transparent prioritization metric or matrix, and then we have that multi-agency support, and then also the support of the other folks and institutions represented as STIA members, boy, it sure makes proposal development cleaner and very compelling, and I think pretty easy to get those letters of support, or for everybody to have talking points and be on the same page as to why we're focused on what we're focused on a particular day, week, month.
Other thoughts about criteria and prioritizing sections of the trail?
I think just to throw it out there, I think having some type of statement on, are we looking to develop trail in both ends where there's more population, and then kind of do the golden spike deal where we work towards the middle through river and canyon. Does that make sense? I think that's kind of the default strategy at this point, but it might be good just to articulate that or see if, there are other perspectives. And then of course, just to throw it in, obviously the OCSR's lease on the rail line between Enright and Tillamook is a factor as well in terms of timeline.
Go ahead, Bill. I can't share my screen, but I'm going to go ahead and post in the chat the criteria that I've captured so far. Go ahead, Bill.
So if you're really looking at this at a straight cost estimate, it makes far more sense to do the trail on the east side than it does along the coast where we have to do rail with trail. I mean, the cost per mile can be just outrageous when you're trying to do both. So, and I don't know how you factor that in, because the west side needs some trail too. And it might be that we just have to look to where it's feasible to do rail with trail rather than looking at a bigger picture. And I don't know how you put that into the criteria, but if you can build 10 miles of trail for X amount on the east side and only 2 miles on the west side, it kind of leans towards getting funding more to get this trail started and going. So, and that may not be a criteria, and I may be in trouble from all the coastal segment, but that's the reality of the situation we're looking at.
And I agree with you, Bill. And I also would throw out there, it's never going to get cheaper. And so, waiting a decade to do it is not right either. But I do think we need to have that conversation, because once a segment is done, I mean, look where we were with the Banks Vernonia Trail. I mean, everybody was like, oh, that's going to be horrible. And I mean, we not on that particular trail, but we just as an agency hit over 3 million visitors in this last year. It's the highest we've ever had. I mean, it is what people do. So, I do think that we have to have that larger, tougher conversation. It's expensive, but there is a lot of safety components, and that the price tag for the safety, especially on 101, is, yeah. So yes, and it won't get cheaper.
Well, and it's an interesting conversation too about do we prioritize the criteria, right? Is there anything within the criteria that says if it doesn't meet this objective, then it needs to move down the list, or if it does meet this objective, it automatically moves to the top of the list. And some of that is going to be dictated by the eligibility criteria for the grant opportunity. But Bill, to your point, cost is sort of a piece of this bigger puzzle of criteria to consider. All right, other thoughts about project criteria?
One here,
Priorities. Go ahead, John Paul.
Jennifer. Part of it is understanding our partners' priorities as well. So, I know that ODF is facing, has a lot of issues to balance right now. I know also that they're investing in their REI program, and so if there is an opportunity to build some trail in the canyon section or the middle, and there would be some connectivity to existing trails, or it serves as a crown jewel that helps move helps elevate recreation within ODF internally. I think that might really make a whole lot of sense, especially if it does what Bill says, and it's potentially a much less cost per mile. So there may be some good reason for us to do some work, particularly in the state forest, sooner than later.
And John, we should discuss that, and I think it makes good sense what you're talking about. So
great. Look forward to following up on it.
Great.
All right, Bill, your hand is still up.
Sorry. When you're 71, your hand won't go down easy either.
Jennifer, I have one more criteria
okay. Yes.
to add. I think that we should be very reluctant to build trail where we think we may have a negative impact long term, and to only move forward when we feel really good about the design there. So that is specifically relevant to the corridor along the Salmonberry River and cold water fisheries there. So just making sure that ducks are in a row for particularly environmental sensitive areas before we move forward.
Great. All right, super. Well, this has been a really fruitful conversation, and I know John Paul is going to capture much of what we've talked about in terms of next steps and give us something draft to react and respond to. I guess I'll throw the ask out. Is there anyone who through this conversation has felt incredibly compelled to serve on a small group that might support John Paul in putting pencil to paper? All right, John Paul, I will leave it to you to follow up with individuals directly. Yes, Commissioner Willie.
Well, so when you say pencil to paper, again, are we talking about the priorities of different segments of the trail, or what's the specific job you were asking for there? I'm sorry, I might have missed something in there.
That's okay. It's to take a look at the strategic plan and to provide draft updates to the strategic plan. And I anticipate that will include all of the things that we've been talking about today. So STIA membership, roles and responsibilities, looking at both STIA and STF, and then thinking about next steps in terms of implementation strategy. And Bill's hand is up. I'm assuming that means he's volunteering.
Yay, I second that.
Yeah, I'll volunteer. I've had some experience with some of the strategic planning in the past and things, and it is time to update it. So yeah, I would volunteer.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil.
Excellent. And Mike, is that your hand volunteering as well?
If I can help, I'd be happy to help.
Awesome. Great.
All right. Commissioner Willie, you're still off mute. Are you Are you contemplating a volunteering?
Can you hear my, is it the smoke
can
coming
see
out
the
of my
ears.
ears? Well, I definitely think that that we, and I'm saying we collaboratively with Diami, to maybe just have a sidebar conversation about what I guess input I think we should be providing from our side of the mountains there. But I certainly, like I said, I'm feeling a little bit like I'm at capacity, primarily because I'm running a campaign and I am maintaining all of my other duties. And I certainly don't want to commit Diami to something without having that conversation, but we'll circle back around and get back to John Paul on maybe some thoughts that we have on that. So at this point in time, that's the best I can commit to doing.
That's great. We'll just put a pin in a Washington County representative. Thanks. And Dave is raising his hand.
I'm just wondering, just to be efficient in time, to stem on to what Commissioner Willie said, it probably would make sense that, John Paul, if you send along the current plan for markup to everyone, and at least while you're trying to get folks around, at least you can get thoughts coming back on paper to pencil instead of waiting for another time to convene.
We'll do. I can send that out after our meeting, and it's also included in the packet I sent on Monday for this meeting, the existing strategic plan. So feel free to pull that up, redline, share thoughts in whatever way is most convenient for you.
Perfect. Well, with that, I think I'm turning the baton back over to John Paul for the next item on the agenda, which is the STF report. But I appreciate everybody's participation in thinking through some of these pieces that are so important to next steps.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, that conversation made my Friday, and I see a really good path forward for us. So I'll break this down along a few lines. Would love to have some conversation around it in terms of what I see as essentially core business for STF right now. Continue to prove concept that we can bring in public funding for pieces of infrastructure. On that front, our focus most recently has been on this EDA proposal, which we'd initially targeted the Barview Garibaldi section for, and we were thinking we were going to go big, a $10 to $12 million ask potentially, and getting into construction. We convened a group of folks. I think it was, by and large, good process. Michelle was really closely involved in that. And really appreciate Jay's engagement as well through ODOT. Basically, what we found out is that the timing was not going to align with the EDA funding. Specifically, that ODOT was getting their heads around the work that they needed to do on the rock wall there, knowing that was going to be a bigger project and it needed more scoping and just wouldn't fit in with the timeline for that proposal. The good news is that we have a group of stakeholders that's been engaged. We have more inputs for the scope and design of that. And then the particularly good news that emerged somewhat recently is that ODOT is going to be incorporating the Salmonberry Trail plan in their scoping of the repairs that they need to do in that area. So that's a really big, win for us. Basically, ODOT's going to be putting resource toward figuring out what needs to be done for us to have a feasible design for that section. So while the timing didn't work out for us to submit for an EDA grant, I think that really challenging section has moved forward in a really meaningful way. And that scoping work looks like we'll get underway with ODOT resources in March. So though he's not here, special thanks to Jay for his work. Really monumental work on that front. That has pivoted us to Washington County. So I'm working with Diami and Parametrics. We've used some of the Washington County seed funding to contract with Parametrics on a scope for them to support proposal development for preliminary planning for the, that proposal would probably be somewhere in the $500,000 to $700,000 range. It will not take we won't be to that 30% design build, not necessarily quote unquote shovel ready, but significantly moves this project forward, and would include also the land use planning work that needs to be done to get us to at least a minimal or soft surface trail. So big thanks to Commissioner Willie and Diami. They moved mountains and gave us the chance to pitch for MISTIP funding to serve as match for this EDA proposal. And despite our best efforts to give ourselves an 8 or 6 month timeline on it, on getting the proposal in, we're nearing that date now. We've got a lot of hands on deck for it, and look forward to getting it in, though a much more a modest proposal in a different scope than we initially anticipated. Diami or Commissioner Willie, is there anything that you guys would like to add, specific to that EDA project, or kind of where we're sitting now?
Well, I think if you want an intelligent response, that would come from Diami, because I'm on the periphery here. But so, Diami, do you have any? I mean, I know we talked about the opportunity grant with MISTIP money and those kinds of things, and moving ahead on that. Diami, do you have anything else that you'd like to add in there?
No, I think John Paul's been much of the heavy lifting with the consultant. I think they're hopefully heading in the right direction. It's a big lift to try to throw this together in such a short time frame. So hopefully EDA is open to this, and it sounds like they are at least aware of the opportunity and seems giving some support and moving forward with it. So
yeah, well, I just want to, at some point, maybe we talk about expectations on capture rate. I think I'm really grateful that the Rockaway Community Paths project landed. I just want to make sure we manage expectations of the proposals we develop, which will be funded. That aside, the process for getting us here was just wonderful in that we started on the coast. Michelle and others there played a really central role in convening the right group of stakeholders, moving the project concept down the road. When we needed to pivot, we pivoted. Came to Diami and Commissioner Willie with a short timeline and a big ask. They were both incredibly responsive. Somehow we were able to get the match we would need, we needed for what is now becoming a last minute proposal for the catalytic loop. So just in terms of process, how we're navigating these opportunities, I think it's phenomenal, and want to just thank those of you who have been involved on the coastal section and now the loop trail. And Mike suggested I mention what EDA is. This is the Economic Development Administration. This is ARPA funding for travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation, targeted largely to help tourism economies that were set back due to COVID. So certainly a good opportunity for us. Maybe not the tightest alignment between what we're proposing and the program criteria, but an opportunity worth pursuing. So in addition to that, in terms of upcoming public funding opportunities for construction, we're finally getting the IGA signed between Rockaway and ODOT. So look for that existing funding for community paths to be moving forward here pretty soon. Safe routes to school funding is coming up. In the not too distant future, I think it is in sometime later in the spring that the kind of concepts are due and we get feedback. So really good opportunity to go phase 2 Rockaway connector there, and then potentially a similar type of proposal in Garibaldi. We've talked in the past about Metro Nature Bond funding and the way that criteria is emerging there. One of the things I would really like to bump up on our priority list is a consolidated campaign to see if we can have the Salmonberry included in the visionary projects line. I think particularly as the criteria around DEI is distilled, we are seeing that a lot of the 20 million around the trails funding will likely go to more urban communities, which makes sense. That's the feedback they've gotten on the DEI front. So again, that shifts our focus more towards potentially that visionary project area. Jennifer, please.
I just have a quick question, and I'm sorry I haven't been following this more closely, but you mentioned that the IGA between the city and ODOT is well underway. I guess I just want to flag for this group as we're thinking about strategic planning and the role of STIA in terms of setting trail standards for continuity. Where is STIA in that agreement? Is it just understood by the city and ODOT that there are trail standards because this is part of the Salmonberry, or should STIA be more actively and specifically engaged? I don't know that I have an answer to the question. I just want to make sure that we're being thoughtful, particularly as we're talking about standards for a much broader effort.
Yeah, that's a really good consideration, Jennifer. And I think in terms of public infrastructure funding, this is a case where STF stepped up and helped do the convening and developing the proposal, and it was it will be administered by ODOT. I think the best future strategy is that STF is building capacity to be able to administer these public funds. That would be an important revenue stream for the organization, and it would also help ensure the alignment that you're talking about, particularly as STF and STIA are increasingly on the same page. So depending on who the lead applicant is and how these pieces of construction funding are administered, I think that changes the conversation, or at least the channels for the conversation on things like trail standards. But it would certainly make sense to me if we had, very clear expectations with the project lead, or for example, in this case, the city of Rockaway, on those trail standards going into the proposal development process. Michelle.
Just as an FYI, I actually have a 1:15 meeting up at the city of Rockaway. So if there's any message you want me to throw out preemptively, just let me know.
Thank you. I'm not particularly concerned that we haven't had a more robust trails standards conversation with the city. They've been a really great partner in this. I don't anticipate it being a problem, but Michelle, I think just laying the foundation, mentioning that it's a pending conversation would be a benefit. And that we're piloting with them essentially.
Okay.
So, I think we want to track pretty well how the conversation goes and then replicate and create efficiencies.
Also, I don't know how this Zoom magic works, but my phone popped up with a message from Jack Thayer. I don't know if everybody got that, saying he's listening to the STIA meeting, and are we still committing to the Oregon Coast Railroad ?
Do you mind if we get back to that question during the public comment period, Michelle?
That's fine with me. I just didn't know if it showed up somewhere that I'm not seeing or if it came directly to me.
I don't think I've seen it yet, but I haven't been on my email.
So now I've done my duty and it's in your hands.
Thank you. Then obviously, of course, we have, federal infrastructure funding that coming through ODOT, circling back to our conversation about having them more engaged in a convener role. Those are the public funding opportunities that I see in the on a kind of a 6-12 month horizon. I'm sure more will show up, but those would allow us essentially to have some pretty good progress on those areas that I mentioned are kind of de facto priorities right now, and I think fairly well vetted. I think one of the more important conversations for us to have is around match funding for these larger infrastructure dollars that are coming down the pipe. We've looked to Washington County, and they've been very generous in approving funds through their opportunity fund, cash match the opportunity fund. I would anticipate that with more federal money coming through, local resources for match will be more strained than ever. So even though there will be more money in this space, it might be harder and harder to get the cash match for that funding. And I think it would benefit us to have a conversation around that, do some brainstorming and thinking about how we can be competitive and have that access to cash match so we can take advantage of this moment of history that we're in with federal infrastructure funding. Part of that conversation obviously is STF building its muscles in doing private donor engagement and getting some of that funding rolling in as well. And we're on that path there. I think it will probably be a year or two before a lot of that machinery is stood up and really bringing significant funding in. And also just to mention it, if we're looking at say 20% match and we want to develop a $10 to $15 million proposal, that's really significant funding, and that would be a very big ask, even with us having a development director and a pretty good database that we're working. So somewhere in here is the idea of match funding might be increasingly challenging and increasingly important in the not too distant future. Specifically to that point, I think that Washington County is looking at funding, renewing the funding for the Opportunity Fund. I had that number at some point. I want to say it was something like 5 to 7 million, maybe over the next 5 years. So thank you, Jerry. So while that's a good number, that's a big number. We are certainly not going to be the only project coming to the table asking for that funding. And if we execute well on what we're saying we're going to do, we would outstrip that Opportunity Fund, for example, over a 5-year period, even if they said we could be the only ones to access it. And then similarly in Tillamook County, they do not have an Opportunity Fund, but do have TLT funds. So I think we can make the case to ask for match out of those funds, but again, not a limitless resource. And that funding has recently been spent down with land acquisition further south in the county. So just want to mention that as a landscape. I think it will be more central to our conversations as we implement over the next year. All right, not seeing any questions or comments. I'll continue to move forward here. We've covered some of this already, but as STF grows up as an organization, it's really important for us to put some organizational development fundamentals in play, and a big part of that, I think, is the alignment of expectations. So I won't speak too much right now to what that might look like, because I think Jennifer covered it really well. But it is very important to me that the stakeholders around the table have aligned expectations, and that I'm able to deliver on those. It's something unique to this project, certainly, at least in my experience. There's such a broad range of stakeholders, from STF board members and the expectations they might individually bring in, STIA members as well, different agency staff, public perceptions, just a lot of inputs and a lot of expectations to try to manage. So that added with kind of the daily tasks or the execution around these different areas for the foundation, just appreciate the conversation about how we can create more of that alignment, and avoid the risk of just being very responsive organization. So Jennifer, I would be happy to drill into any more specifics, but also would be happy to just open up and see if there's conversation around, what the next 6 months looks like, how folks would like to have some input into that.
I think open dialogue would be useful.
And it may be getting the stuff we talked about earlier in play might actually feed into that, John Paul. I think that once we get that piece in, it'll be much easier to give you better feedback for the next 6 months.
And I think there's definitely be great to do planning work, just coordinated planning work, with STIA, STF, and I don't think it has to be a Baroque overwrought process by any means, but certainly creating that clarity of expectation will be a benefit. Bill.
So I'm looking here, and it looks to me like we need to get our trail standards done between now and in fairly short order, because those are going to be crucial to moving forward. Would there be interest in forming a committee to put together a trail standards index or download one from another area and see if we can start building on that? Because I think that needs to be a priority if we're already starting to build trail with no standards.
Agreed that it's priority.
I do think we need to have a committee that works on that. And I think we have a good starting place. We did some of this work. Mike helped me here, but I think some of that is already started. So I think it'd be kind of dusting it off and, making better recommendations in between us and forestry. And if we can get out to the table, we should be able to give some pretty decent standards that are going to, meet most of the criteria for any grant that you'd apply for. So, but I totally agree with you. That's been my apprehension the whole time, is that we're going to start developing and have different standards. And it's really important that 84 miles is, continually has the same look and feel and the same standards as much as possible where it's feasible, because there are places that it's not going to look exactly the same. But having those standards is going to be super important before we actually put a shovel in the ground.
Yeah, I think you're right, Lisa and Bill. We have from the canyon plan, the valley plan, the coastal plan, we have some general standards and general, expectation setting, but we don't have to, if we want the signs to look the same all the way across, there's work to do there. So important, difficult, sort of very fine detail.
Michelle?
I would add to that too, because John Paul and I have talked about this ad nauseum the last month on what this might look like. And exactly to what Mike said. Hi, Mike, I haven't seen you in a long time. With the signage, I think that's going to be the most consistent thing across the way. But it's not just the standards, it's also the agreements that will have to be with these different entities. So an agreement with the creamery should look the same as the agreement with the city of Rockaway. And so just whatever it is on who's going to do the maintenance and things like that. So it's more than just, is it all going to be a 6-foot trail versus, what are the obligations of each party? So I think that's where my mind has been. And that's where we had left it with Dennis before he retired for the umpteenth time last year or year before. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I do think we have the document that starting around the creamery extension for trail standards. So that's a great point of departure. It predates me, and having a few folks to dust that off and take it to the next step would be great. I wonder also if there's opportunity for more collaboration with ODF in this space. Again, back to the REI team. I'm not sure what work's being done around trail standards, in general. But if it would be beneficial to pull somebody in, particularly for the canyon section or anything in the state forest, that would be welcome. And then Lisa, also any kind of expertise or template that state parks might have would be great to make sure we're leveraging and collaborating there as well.
No, that's great, John Paul. And I would suggest that maybe in the interim, we could get together with some of my REI folks and state forest people and Mike Caffaretta and kind of discuss some of that stuff. And definitely we want to be in critical alignment with OPRD and everyone else too. So
I again, I see Salmonberry as really hopefully a central piece to ODF's emerging recreation plans. And I know that I wouldn't be surprised if there's any apprehension within the agency about, gosh, who's going to maintain this over time? What's it going to look like? So if we can address any of those really, early on and make it a participatory process, I would welcome it. And then also if there's any of this work that we're developing that will benefit the REI team, that they can copy paste or, amend and repurpose. Any chance we have to support, offer value, would like to do that as well.
Yeah, this is just part of the package of full benefits to Oregonians, REI. And it also hits a strong socioeconomic requirements that we have for our state land. So, no, this is good stuff to talk about and get moving on.
Great. Jennifer, this may take us towards the public comment period. I want to make sure we have time to at least get a few of the comments in that we've received, but we'll be happy to, put a bow on anything, or if there are specific activities, there are quite a few. We're working on quite a few things that I didn't mention in that update. So if any of you have, specific questions around them, I'd be happy to share. I think to sum it up, a lot of STF's energy for the next year needs to be getting quite a bit of business fundamentals in place so that a year from now, we are able to really scale up the funding that we're bringing in, both for that opportunity fund, a cash reserve from private citizens, but also that we can really develop high quality proposals with partners, have those in, administer them, be building the capacity to be federally certified, to be processing, serious construction funding. So essentially lay the foundation so that we can grow and scale as an organization to get this work done over time. So a lot of internal work, a lot of organizational development, systems, processes, the types of things we're here talking about today. And I would just actually circle that back around to the board conversation, with STF. I think that's one differentiator, is that, STIA is generally operating on kind of a higher level. And so we may not be talking about, some of the under the hood mechanics of organizational development, nor would I expect us to. But again, having some crossover so that there's a little bit more flow of those different conversations and priorities would benefit us all. Great.
Thanks, John Paul. I think a takeaway from that is in that small group that's going to be working on the strategic plan and some of that charter and reviews, kind of looking at, we may want to have that same group identify certain committees that might be necessary. And in particular, I heard one around the standards and agreements with potential trail partners, and then that prioritization and the construction stuff. So that way we just don't lose that. If you guys can help me with making sure that stays identified and it doesn't drop, because it's going to be equally important. Great. And I think we're at that space in the agenda now for public comment. And John Paul, I don't know if you're the one getting those when things are streaming, how that works. I know we have the one that Michelle got.
So I'll go back to the stream and see if there are any others there. We've asked folks to submit public comment via email to my email. Okay. 3 days prior to the meeting. I know this has been a little bit challenging rescheduling the meeting, so we'd be happy to take any comments that have come up in the chat. The comments that we have right now, the first is from Nancy Mack, who says that she's very excited about the trail. Found part of it in an old hiking book, which was a beautiful area. Though a little washed out, was a wonderful quiet trek. The idea of it running from banks to the coast range is excellent, and I would be glad to help as much as I can.
I hear a volunteer.
Yes. Public comment from Corey Goldbeck. 2 points here. The first is the railroad was wiped out due to a flood. How do we know another flood won't wipe out the trails? And then the second being, some places are best left untouched. The foot traffic that will take place here will ruin a gem. It's beautiful now, and only a matter of time the rivers will see trash and will quickly deplete the wild steelhead that return to the stream for spawning. So just to quickly address those public comments, though I'm sure it won't be complete. I don't think we have an assurance that a flood won't wipe out trail, particularly through the canyon, which is why through public engagement and the engineering study, the preliminary planning, that the trail in that area will not be paved. And we will need to anticipate some maintenance for that trail. There's also an opportunity in the design phase, in the next design phase, to look at alignment and not necessarily follow exactly where the rail bed is now, but using the existing right-of-way to have an alignment that makes the most sense, that is, has inputs that were not in consideration when the railroad was built there over 100 years ago. So I certainly take both of his points here, quite frankly. I think folks who have spent time in that canyon know what it looks like and know that there will be some washouts, and that is part of the inherent beauty of that place. Also an opportunity, I think, to educate users about the way we manage working forests and interact with nature, and what some of the limitations of that are. To Corey's second point here about some places being best left untouched, and an assumption that foot traffic will ruin a gem and deplete wild steelhead returns. I guess I would just assure Corey that I understand that concern, that we don't have a great history of human impacts on the ecosystem, that I personally would consider my role in this a failure if those assumptions prove correct in 20 years. I love this project because I love that place, in particular the Salmonberry Canyon, the whole Nehalem Valley, and have a particular fondness for steelhead and anadromous fish. So there's a lot of work ahead of us to help ensure that we don't degrade a place that we're opening access to. And I take that very seriously, personally and professionally. We have one more public comment from Anita Metlin, who we heard from some months ago, who has a rail riding operation in Eastern Oregon and is requesting a lease on some of the rail lines so that they could run that operation again in the future. I think that would be challenging to address fully in public comment right now. Lisa, Jennifer, Michelle, maybe a conversation that we have, if it is appropriate, put it on the agenda for a next STIA meeting. Regardless, I'd be happy to get Anita a response and talk through some of the logistics of why that may or may not be feasible.
Agree. I think if we can capture the logistics around it and look into it, it's a much easier conversation than trying to handle it real quickly.
Diami, please, and then I'll get to the comment that Michelle shared.
Okay, I was just going to share another public comment that we received from Councilor Marsha Kirk at the City of Banks, who's supportive of their involvement and participation on STIA, and also supported COLPAC representation. Hopefully I captured that correctly, Marsha, if you're still watching.
Thank you. And thank you, Marsha, for that support. Appreciate your partnership. We have, so let me get to the comment that Michelle shared earlier from Jack Thayer, who's listening to the meeting. Are we still committed to the Oregon Coast Railroad? I'm not entirely clear on what that's alluding to in terms of a commitment to the railroad. I can say that the design concepts that we are working on now, both in Barview and Rockaway, are rail with trail and very collaborative with the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad. We had input from Michelle Yank in Tillamook County requesting that criteria for proximity to population centers be included so that there are opportunities for physical activities that benefit those communities. Great point, Michelle. Thank you. Then two more comments here from the thread, and I think that will wrap it up. Scott Atwater says that the Salmonberry Trail is not a vision, it is a bad idea. And Lauren Lake asks where and how one can volunteer, signed up as a potential volunteer on the website, but hasn't heard back. To the latter point there, Lauren, we are looking at getting some mechanical brushing. We've done volunteer activities and have hit a wall of literal wall of blackberry and things that aren't fun for volunteers. So as soon as we have some more mechanized support that we can pay for, we will get volunteers back out to work with hand tools, and look forward to doing some stewardship work in the canyon section in the future as well. Mike, please.
Yeah, I know the Zoom format is tough for the public, and so I'm sure there's some folks out there that I work with that if they were here, they would probably be at the meeting, and just sort of on their behalf is reminding us all to think about those communities and the landowners that live next to it. And we try to do that in the concept plan, just think about how to make the trail compatible with those communities we move through. And so I know they would want us to be mindful of that. And so I know we're all trail supporters here for various reasons and all the benefits the trails provide, and just wanting us all to remember to recognize we're going through a historic place people live. So
yeah,
their behalf, I would offer that.
Good point, Mike, because even to the last public comment, we sit here and talk about it, what a vision it is and what a great thing it is, but it's also not in every one of our backyards. And so we need to be very mindful and listen to that constructive feedback and take that all into consideration. And that has been harder to do when we're not in person and folks aren't in the room with us, but please know that it's not lost on us, that is still a concern, and we'll continue to work as closely as we can with all of our neighbors.
And if someone needs a green screen, we have some seedlings right now. We can probably find a way to plant some trees, which we have done a little bit of that. And we would be willing to do some more of that if people can call me. So.
Great. Thank you, Mike. And I would just offer also, that folks get a hold of me by phone or by email with their concerns. I don't want to short shrift those at all. We'll be happy to talk through those concerns with individuals. So my email for anybody listening, it should be fairly easy to find. It's John Paul, JON-PAUL @salmonberrytrail.org. And welcome the conversation.
Excellent, John Paul, thank you. And thanks for everybody's patience and trying to figure out how to do public comment, and the willingness to just grab stuff out of the chat 3 days before may be a lot for folks right now. So appreciate the flexibility to continue to try to find ways to still engage and yet be a part. So I don't think, are there any other things that folks need to bring up for the benefit of everyone else on the board here? Great conversation today, you guys. Thank you. I appreciate Jennifer. Thank you for facilitating that, and the folks who volunteered to help get the next steps going on working on the strategic plan and the committees and the charters and the bylaws and getting us a little bit better organized. Appreciate those efforts. Let Cal and I know if you need more support or assistance from us. We'll figure out how to either get us or the right people from our teams to be able to help you guys. So good, very yes, Jennifer, great productive conversation, and appreciate y'all taking the time. And look at that, we're gonna be almost 2 minutes ahead of schedule, unless anybody has anything. Okay, well, we will adjourn. You all enjoy the rest of your afternoon and have a great weekend.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.